Bad Company by Walter de la Mare. It is very seldom that one encounters what would appear to be sheer, unadulterated evil in a human face. An evil, I mean active, deliberate, deadly, dangerous. One winter's evening, some little time ago, bound on a visit to a friend in London, I found myself on the platform of one of its many subterranean railway stations. It is an ordeal that one may undergo as seldom as one can. The glare and glitter, the noise, the very air one breathes affect nerves and spirits. One expects vaguely strange meetings in such surroundings. On this occasion, the expectation was justified. The mind is at times more attentive than the eye. Already tired and troubled with personal cares and problems, which a little wisdom and enterprise would have refused to entertain, I had seated myself on one of the low wooden benches to the left of the entrance to the platform, when, for no conscious reason, I was prompted to turn my head in the direction of a fellow traveller, seated across the gangway, on the fellow to my bench, some few yards away. What was wrong with him? He was enveloped in a loose cape or cloak, sombre, motionless. He appeared to be wholly unaware of my abrupt scrutiny. And yet I doubted, for the very next moment, although the door of the nearest coach gaped immediately opposite him, he had shuffled into the compartment I had entered myself, and now, in its corner, confronted me, all but knee to knee. I could have touched him with my hand. We had, too, come at once into an even more intimate contact than that of touch. Our eyes, his own fixed in a dwelling and lethargic stare, had instantly met, and no less rapidly. Mine had uncharitably recoiled, not only in misgiving, but in something little short of disgust. The effect resembled that of an acid on milk, and for the time being cast my thoughts into confusion. Yet that one glance had taken him in. He was old, over 70. A wide-brimmed, rusty and dusty black hat concealed his head, a head fringed with wisps of hair, lank and paper grey. His loose, jaded cheeks were the colour of putty, the thin lips above the wide, unshaven and dimpled chin showing scarcely a trace of red. The cloak, suspended from his shoulders, mantled him to his shins. One knuckled, cadaverous, mittened hand clasped a thick ash stick, its handle black and polished with long usage. The only sign of life in his countenance was secreted in his eyes, fixed on mine, hazed and with a dull glisten, as a snail in winter is fixed to a wall. There was a dull, deliberate challenge in them, and, as I fancied, something more than that. They suggested that he had been in wait for me, that, for him, it was almost well met. For minutes together I endeavoured to accept their challenge, to make sure. Yet I realized, fascinated the while, that he was well aware of the futility of this attempt, as a snake is of the restless, fated bird in the branches above its head. Such a statement, I am aware, must appear wildly exaggerated, but I can only record my impression. It was already latish, much later than I had intended. The passengers came and went, and whether intentionally or not, none consented to occupy the seat vacant beside him. I fixed my eyes on an advertisement, that of a friendly society, I remember, immediately above his head, with the intention of watching him in the field of an eye that I could not persuade to meet his own in full focus again. He had instantly detected this ingenious device. By a fraction of an inch he had shifted his grasp upon his stick. So intolerable at length became the physical and psychical effect of the presence on me, that I determined to leave the train at the next station, and there to await the next. And at this precise moment I was conscious that he had not only withdrawn his eyes, but closed them. I was not so easily to free myself of his company, however. A glance over my shoulder, as after leaving the train I turned towards the lift, showed him hastily groping his way out of the carriage. The metal gate clanged, the lift slid upwards, and such is the contrariness of human nature that a faint disappointment followed. One may, for example, be appalled and yet engrossed in reading an account of some act of infamous cruelty. Concealing myself as best I could, I awaited the next lift load. Its few passengers having dispersed, he himself followed. In spite of age and infirmity, he had then ascended alone the spiral staircase. Glancing, it appeared, neither to left or right, he passed rapidly through the barrier, and yet had he not seen me? The collector raised his head, but made no attempt to retrieve his ticket. It was dark now, the dark of London. In my absence underground, minute frozen pellets of snow had fallen, whitening the streets and lulling the sound of the traffic. On emerging into the street, he turned in the direction of the next station, my own. Yet again, had he or had he not been aware that he was being watched? However that might be, my journey lay his way, and that way my feet directed me, although I was later than I had intended. I followed him, led on, no doubt, in part merely by the effect he had had on me. Some 20 or 30 yards ahead, his dark shapelessness showed distinct against the whitening pavement. The waters of the Thames, I was aware, lay on my left. A muffled blast from the siren of a tug announced its presence. Keeping my distance, I followed him on. 1 lamp-post, 2, 3. At that, he seemed to pause for a moment, as if to listen momentarily. He glanced back, as I fancied, and vanished. When I came up with it, I found that this third lamp-post vaguely illuminated the mouth of a narrow, lightless alley between high walls. It led me, after a while, into another alley, yet dingier. The wall on the left of this was evidently that of a large garden. On the right came a row of houses, looming up in their neglect against a starless sky. The first of these houses appeared to be occupied. The next 2 were vacant. In the faint hope of other company coming my way, and vowing that I would follow no farther than to the outlet of yet another pitch-black and uninviting alley or court, which might indeed prove a dead end, I turned into it. It was then that I observed in the rays of the lamp over my head that, in spite of the fineness of the snow and the brief time that had elapsed, there seemed to be no trace on its surface of recent footsteps. A faintly thudding echo accompanied me on my way. I have found it very useful to carry a small electric torch in my greatcoat pocket, but for the time being I refrained from using it. This alley proved not to be blind. Beyond a patch of waste ground, a nebulous leaden-grey vacancy marked a loop here of the Thames. I decided to go on no farther, and then perceived a garden gate in the wall to my right. It was ajar, but could not long have been so, because a flash of my torch showed marks in the snow of its recent shifting, and yet there was little wind. On the other hand, here was the open river. Just a breath of a breeze across its surface might account for this. The cracked and blistered paint was shimmering with a thin coat of rime, of hoar-frost, and, as if a finger had but just now scrawled it there, a clumsy arrow showed, its V pointing inwards. A tramp, an errand boy, mere accident might have accounted for this. It may indeed have been a mark made some time before on the paint. I paused in an absurd debate with myself, chiefly, I think, because I felt some little alarm at the thought of what might follow, yet led on also by the conviction that I had been decoyed to follow. I pushed the gate a little wider open, peered in, and made my way up a woody path towards the house. And then I called, in tones as near to those of a London policeman as I could manage, "Hello there! Is anything wrong?" After all, I could at least explain to my fellow passenger, if he appeared, that I found both his gate and his window open, and the house was hardly pleasantly situated. No answer was returned to me. In doubt and disquietude, but with a conviction that all was not well, I flashed my torch over the walls and furniture of the room and its heavily framed pictures. How could anything be well with unseen company such as this besieging one's senses? Ease and pleasant companionship the room may once have been capable of giving. In its dirt, cold, and neglect, it showed nothing of that now. I crossed it, paused again in the passage beyond it, and listened. I then entered the room beyond. Venetian blinds, many of the slats which had outworn their webbing, and heavy crimson Chanel curtains concealed its windows. The ashes of a fire showed beyond rusty bars of the grate under a black marble mantelpiece. An oil lamp on the table, with a green shade, exuded a stink of paraffin. Beyond was a table littered with books and papers, and an overturned chair. There I could see the bent-up old legs, perceptibly lean beneath the trousers, of the occupant of the room. In no doubt of whose remains these were, I drew near, and with bared teeth and icy, trembling fingers, drew back the fold of the cloak that lay over the face. Death has a strange sorcery. A shuddering revulsion of feeling took possession of me. This cold, once genteel, hideous, malignant room, and this. The skin of the blue, loose cheek was drawn tight over the bone. The mouth lay a little open, showing the dislodged false teeth beneath. The dull, unspeculative eyes stared out from beneath lowered lids, beneath the black mouth of the chimney above the fireplace. Vileness and iniquity had left their marks on the lifeless features, and yet it was rather with compassion than with horror and disgust that I stood regarding them. What desolate solitude, what misery must this old man, abandoned to himself, have experienced during the last years of his life. I am not intending to commiserate or excuse what I cannot understand, but the almost complete absence of any goodness in the human spirit cannot but condemn the heart to an appalling isolation. Had he been murdered, or had he come to a violent but natural end? In either case, horror and terror must have supervened. That I had been enticed, deliberately led on to this discovery, I hadn't the least doubt. Deliberately led on. But why? What for? I could not bring myself to attempt to light the lamp. Besides, in that last vigil it must have burned itself out. My torch revealed a stub of candle on the mantelpiece. I lit that. He seemed to have been engaged in writing, when the enemy of us all had approached him in silence and had struck him down. A long and unsealed envelope lay on the table. I drew out the contents, a letter and a will, which had been witnessed some few weeks before, apparently by a tradesman's boy and possibly by some derelict charwoman, Eliza Hinks. I knew enough about such things to be sure that the will was valid and complete. This old man had been evidently more than fairly rich in this world's goods, and reluctant to surrender them. The letter was addressed to his two sisters, to my two sisters Amelia and Maud. Standing there, in the cold and the silence, and utterly alone, for if any occupant of the other world had decoyed me there was not the faintest hint in the consciousness now that he or his influence were any longer present with me. I read the vilest letter that had ever come my way, even in print. It stated that he knew the circumstances of these two remaining relatives, that he was well aware of their poverty and physical conditions. One of them, it seemed, was afflicted with cancer. He then proceeded to explain that, although they should, by the intention of their mother, have had a due share in her property and in the money she had left, it rejoiced him to think that his withholding of this knowledge must continually have added to their wretchedness. Why he so hated them was only vaguely suggested. The will he had enclosed with the letter left all that he died possessed of all human establishments that needed least, the authorities of Scotland Yard. It was to be devoted, it ran, to the detection of such evildoers as are ignorant or imbecile enough to leave their misdemeanours and crimes detectable. It is said that confession is good for the soul. Well then, as publicly as possible, I take this opportunity of announcing that there and then I made a little heap of envelope, letter, and will on the hearth, and put a match to them. When every vestige of the paper had been consumed, I stamped the ashes down. I would leave the vile, jaded, forsaken house to reveal its own secret, and I might ensure that that would not be long delayed. What continues to perplex me is that, so far as I can see, no other agency but that of this evil old recluse himself had led me to my discovery. Why? Can it have been with this very intention? I stooped down and peeped and peered narrowly in under the lowered lids in the light of my torch, but not the feeblest flicker or remotest signal of any message rewarded me. Dead fish are less unseemly. And yet, well, we are all of us, I suppose, at any extreme capable of remorse, and not utterly shut against repentance. Is it possible that this priceless blessing is not denied us, even when all that's earthly else appears to have come to an end?